Okay, let's get this briefing started. Now, I've gone through the preliminary file, and I gotta be honest, I'm really struggling to understand why taxpayer money was being funneled into investigating, well, psychic spies.
I mean, seriously, you're telling me we're about to discuss telepathy? Intercepting thoughts instead of radio signals? Because this feels a whole lot less like a counterintelligence briefing and more like the plot of some bad sci-fi movie.
With all due respect, this wasn't science fiction to the people in charge. That's a direct quote from a 1972 Defense Intelligence Agency assessment. See, the threat wasn't some fantasy. It was a documented national security concern. The real question wasn't, do we believe in this stuff? It was, what if they do? And what if they're actually onto something?
Okay, so let's get into it. To really understand why we even went down this road, you have to appreciate the sheer scale of the Soviet program. It was enormous, state-sponsored, and honestly, it caught US intelligence completely off guard.
And you know, this was our first big mistake. A huge intelligence failure, really. We just assumed that the official Soviet ideology, that rigid scientific materialism, would just laugh off anything to do with parapsychology. We figured they'd call it mysticism or bourgeois nonsense. Boy, were we wrong. While we were chuckling about it, they were busy trying to weaponize it.
And here's the thing, they didn't call it magic or ESP, they gave it a scientific-sounding name, Psychotronics. They treated it like a legitimate, interdisciplinary science, mashing together biology, physics, and psychology. By framing it this way, they took it out of the realm of the occult and put it right into their labs with serious, state-funded research. It was a brilliant move, ideologically speaking.
And this table right here, this really shows you how they did it. They built a whole new scientific vocabulary. What we called ESP, they called bioinformation. Psychokinesis, or moving things with your mind, became bioenergetics. This wasn't just slapping new labels on old ideas. This was about changing the entire conversation to legitimize the research inside their own military-industrial complex.
And believe me, they put their money where their mind was. By the mid-70s, intelligence estimates suggested the Soviets were pouring over 300 million rubles a year into this stuff. Analysts at the time figured that was as much as $500 million annually. We're talking more than 20 dedicated research centers working on this. The scale was just staggering.
And their goals were, frankly, terrifying. Declassified files show they weren't just trying to guess cards in a lab. No, they were researching things like behavior modification from a distance, telepathic hypnosis, even ways to cause physical pain or worse using psychokinesis. This was the so-called darker side of their research, and it was seen as a direct and very spooky threat.
Okay, I get the threat picture now. A massive, well-funded Soviet program with some truly disturbing goals. So, what did we do? How on earth do you even start to fight a war on a battlefield that's literally inside someone's head?
Exactly. And for US intelligence, the big fear wasn't about whether some guy could bend a spoon with his mind. The fear was a side gap. What if the Soviets actually cracked this and we had zero defense? What if they could just read our nuclear launch codes right out of the president's head from a bunker in Siberia? That paranoia opened up a whole new, invisible front in the Cold War. And this slide just nails the difference. The nuclear arms race was terrifying, sure, but it was tangible. You could count missiles, you could verify treaties with satellites. This psychic arms race, though, it was all happening in the realm of pure information. It was totally unverifiable, completely deniable. So the result wasn't mutually assured destruction, it was mutually assured paranoia. So the DIA's assessment laid out these absolute nightmare scenarios. The Soviets could potentially read our most secret documents without ever opening a safe. They could track our submarines just by thinking about it. They could try to mold the thoughts of our own leaders. And in the most extreme, worst-case scenario, they could cause the instant death of a US official from thousands of miles away. You can't just ignore a threat like that. It would have been a complete dereliction of duty. Which, of course, brings us to America's response. Faced with this potential psi gap, the US intelligence community very reluctantly decided it had no choice. It had to get in the game. And the big umbrella program for all this work would eventually be known as Project Stargate. But it's so important to understand this. Our programs were almost entirely defensive in nature. They really came from a desperate need to answer two simple questions. First, is this Soviet threat for real? And second, if it is, can we build our own capabilities to counter it? We weren't out there trying to build an army of psychic soldiers. We were just trying to figure out if the threat was even real.
And you can see right here on the timeline how reactive we were. We confirmed the huge Soviet effort in the late 60s. So in 1972, the CIA kicks off Project Scan8. A few years later, in 78, all that work gets folded into the bigger DIA program, Project Stargate, which then ran all the way until it was shut down and declassified in 1995.
Right, and this chart really puts the whole arms race thing into perspective, doesn't it? Look at those budgets. The Soviets were maybe spending hundreds of millions per year. And the US, over the entire 20-plus years of all our programs combined, we spent a grand total of about $20 million. We weren't even in the same race. We were just trying to find the stadia. That's exactly it. Our entire multi-million-dollar, multi-decade effort basically boiled down to these two fundamental questions. Number one, is any of this stuff real? And number two, if it is, can you actually use it reliably for intelligence gathering? Everything we did, every experiment, was trying to get a solid answer to one of those 2 points. So this whole insane chapter of the Cold War, it wasn't fought with spies and satellites. It was fought with psychics and parapsychologists. It's just an incredible story. A secret war for the ultimate high ground, the human mind itself. That's what it was. It was the ultimate information war. Because the battlefield wasn't some piece of land, it was human consciousness. And the weapon wasn't a bomb or a bullet, it was thought. The end goal was to take an enemy's greatest asset, the brilliant minds of their leaders and scientists, and turn it into their biggest weakness.
You know, back in 1975, the Soviet premier, Brezhnev, he publicly called for the US to ban research into new kinds of weapons that were, in his words, more terrible than anything the world has known. Now, at the time, everyone just assumed he meant new nukes or something. But inside the intelligence community, some folks read that as a very veiled and very chilling reference to the power of their psychotronic weapons.
And even though Stargate was declassified in '95, you know, the story's not really over. Thousands of pages were released, sure, but key sections are still blacked out with a marker. And those redactions, they just keep fueling speculation about what really worked, what didn't, and what secrets might still be buried in the black ink. But here's what we know for sure from what we saw of the Soviet research. Their main goal, stated right there in their own documents, was the control and manipulation of human consciousness. That was the strategic objective. Everything else, the psychic spying, the remote influencing, that was all just a means to an end. That was the end game. Which I guess leaves us with one last nagging question. This truly bizarre chapter of the Cold War is officially over. But now, in an age of disinformation, social media manipulation, computational propaganda, has the war for the human mind ever really ended? Or has it just moved to a new battlefield?